webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us for our board management webinar. Today we're joined by Linnell Smith. She's our program manager, and she can be reached at linnell@awista.org. Linnell comes to Awista with extensive background in native CDFI industry as a former executive director of a native CDFI serving the Navajo Nation. Linnell joined Awista 5 months ago, and we were so happy to have her on our team. My name is Stephanie Cote. I'll be your webinar facilitator. I'll be assisting with the background portion of the webinar, answering any questions typed into the chat and question answer section of the webinar. Here at Awista, I'm the communications manager. If you have any future webinar requests or any questions or comments regarding the communications of First Nations Awista Corporation, please email me at stephanie@awista.org. I'm always happy to hear from you. So to test our chat feature, if everyone could type in, what organization are you representing today? The chat feature can be found hopefully on the right-hand side of your screen. Wonderful. I see people are finding the question answer area, and feel free to use that as the chat area as well. And welcome everyone to the webinar. So First Nations Awista Corporation, we support the economic growth of Native American communities through the creation, development, and capitalization of community development financial institutions. We believe that when armed with the appropriate resources, Native peoples hold the capacity and ingenuity to ensure the sustainable economic, spiritual, and cultural well-being of their communities. We have one department is our programs department. We have institutional capacity building, financial education and asset building, which involves our building Native communities, financial skills for families training. If you have any questions regarding our programs department, our program director, Crystal Langholtz, can be reached at crystal@awista.org. We also have a lending department with various loan products that range from startup loans, person loans, capital loans, to native fresh food loans. Our lending and capitalization manager, Emily Trump, can be reached at emily@awista.org. And so next I'd like to launch our first interactive poll of the day. And the question is, you are located in which region? Okay, about 70% have voted. We're going to close the poll in about 5 seconds, so cast your votes now. And now we can see the majority of the people are from the West. And next, I'd like to turn it over to Linnell Smith, who will take over our board management webinar. Linnell?
Okay, great. Thank you, Stephanie. And welcome everyone to the board management training. I'm really excited to see the participation from all over the United States, especially the West. I am stationed in the West as well, so it's great to see so many of us participating in today's webinar. So we have a great presentation that includes a panel of speakers that represent not only CDFIs, but they represent national boards as well. So we're extremely pleased to have them share their experiences with us. So let me go ahead, next. Let me introduce our first panelist, and that would be Ted Piccolo. I have a slight delay in my presentation, so forgive me. Ted serves as the Executive Director for the Northwest Native Development Fund, which has provided economic development loans as large as $220,000 to the Colville Fish and Wildlife Department for community facility renovations, and also played a pivotal role in the opening of the Omak Mill, leading to the employment of over 150 people and paving the way for $17 million in revenue to the Colville Reservation. Ted currently serves as a board member of the Native CDFI Network and ONABN. Next. We also have Twyla Parker, and she is an enrolled tribal member of the Absentee Shawnee Tribe of Oklahoma in Shawnee, Oklahoma. She is the board chair for the Absentee Shawnee Development Corporation, which is an emerging CDFI since 2013. Twyla also served on the Absentee Shawnee Housing Board of Commissioners for the local housing authority there for 10 years. She has a master's in human relations and a bachelor's of liberal studies from the University of Oklahoma. And then lastly, we have Guthrie Ducheneau, a lifelong resident of the Cheyenne River Sioux Indian Reservation. Guthrie works as the information technology specialist for Cheyenne River Health Center in Eagle Butte, South Dakota. He is also the founder and owner of the Quantum Cattle Company and a partner in the Ducheneau Ranch. Guthrie currently sits on the board of directors for ONABN and the Cheyenne River Youth Project, and is the former treasurer of the Cheyenne River Sioux Tribal Ventures and former president of the board of directors for OCT Sakowin Education Consortium. So I'd like to welcome our panel presenters. I will be going through the content of the PowerPoint of the presentation, and then we'll definitely be hearing from all of our panel presenters as we go along. Okay? Next. So we have our next poll. So I'd like for you guys to let me know who you are all representing. So I represent my organization as a staff member, board member, committee member, potential board member, or anybody else that can be classified in one of those categories. Okay, great. It looks like we have the results of our poll. So it's a pretty even mix right now of staff members and board members, which is great because in order to have good board management, we have to have equal participation from generally executive staff members as well as the board. Next. So today we're going to be talking about board management, and we're going to discuss board management techniques, identifying and addressing skills and strengths for your organization, effective recruitment, and how do we improve board engagement. So simply, what is board management? It's basically the function that coordinates the efforts of people to accomplish goals and objectives using available resources efficiently and effectively. So those are really key words there. In our line of work, generally in nonprofits, we want to be efficient and, of course, perform effectively in order to maximize our board members and staff time. So generally, the board is tasked with governing the activities and affairs of the corporation, and this involves the following primary roles. Next. So when we're looking at our board of directors and the general roles of the board, we want to look at three primary roles that we're tasked with as board members or board of directors. So we look at managing risk, where we have the fiduciary responsibility, and fundraising and capitalization is one of our roles as well. So managing risk is really important with boards. So, and this can be tied directly to financial risk, because historically a lot of nonprofits may not necessarily look at the financial risks of the organization by long-term planning in financial areas. However, that's a huge responsibility of the board, and it really affects the overall success of the board, the long-term success of the board. So it's definitely an important part of our responsibilities as a board. And then we also have the fiduciary responsibility. So as board members, we want to make sure that we stay objective, unselfish, responsible, and honest and trustworthy. Those are our roles as a fiduciary agent of the board. So we want to make sure that we're always acting in the good of the organization, and then not so much as for the benefit of ourselves individually. So that's a really important responsibility. And then fundraising and capitalization. This is so key with boards because you have to keep your doors open and operate. If you're a lending organization, capitalizing your loan fund is going to be a vital part. So is this going to be the responsibility of staff, or are we involving our board? Are we actively participating as board members? Because this is a board role, and we're going to talk about some ways to possibly engage our board if this is not an area that is a primary function, or an area that the board is not actively participating in. So, next. So all of these things tie into board responsibilities. So we talked about our roles as a board, the board as a whole. So we also have individual responsibilities as board members that support the management of the board. So we want to look at our individual responsibilities as a board member. So determining the mission and purpose, this is definitely an important part of the organization because it's going to give us direction. We are responsible for policy making, ensuring that we have our governing policies to ensure the effective operations of the organization. And then also effective planning. This can involve strategic planning, operational planning, general staff planning, fiscal oversight, which is one of the responsibilities that we just discussed, the role of an organization. Fundraising and capitalization. We also want to monitor and strengthen programs and services as well, because we want to check in with our program team and find out what's working, what might not be working, and what are some ways that we can address these issues to improve the program and service delivery. And of course, one of the most important roles and responsibilities is to hire the executive director and evaluate the executive director. And at times, if need be, you terminate the executive director. You also will be promoting the organization. You're generally the ambassadors of the organization, so you're one of the frontline individuals in promoting the good things that the organization is doing. And then you want to build a competent board. That's a big part of what we're going to be talking about today in the webinar, is how do I effectively recruit good board members, the right fit board members, and how do I keep them engaged with the organization? So that's one of your responsibilities responsibilities as a board members to build, and then also to self-evaluate. This can be an individual board evaluation, or it may include the board as a whole. Next. So let's go ahead and go towards our, let's take a look at the panel. Or I'm sorry, let's do our next poll. What should the average term of the board members be? Less than 1 year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, or more than 5 years? Great, okay, and it looks like we have the results of the poll, and 86% of you say 3 to 5 years, and 14% were 1 to 2 years. And so the determination of our board terms are generally dictated by our bylaws. So part of the board's responsibility in advance is determining what will be a good term. I know some organizations and tribes have turnover of board members that fall in line with new leadership. So when there's tribal elections, then their board may actually have to recruit new board members. So if they're doing that every 2 years, you have a 2-year turnover. If you have every 4 years, you have a 4-year turnover. So let's pose this question to our panel. So what are your current board terms for the boards that you currently serve on? Ted or Guthrie?
Well, ours at the NNDF for 4 years at the NNDF, which is a really, I think it's a really good timeline myself.
At the Cheyenne River Youth Project, it's a small local organization, that one is, and we don't really have a board.
I'm not sure if they can hear me right now. Ted or Guthrie?
Yeah, we can hear you.
What are your current terms for the boards that you serve on?
The NNDF for 4 years. You hear me now? I mean, I can hear you.
I can hear you, Ted, yeah.
Yeah.
Can the participants hear us? Is there a way we can figure that out?
So yours is a small organization, so is yours 4 years?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, the Cheyenne River Youth Project is a small local organization, and we don't really have terms on that one. The board seat that I have on the UNABN board mine is a 1-year seat. They have staggered term limits, our terms on those ones. So they have 1, 2, and 4 year, I think, right, Ted?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a mix on some of those boards. The one in the local one here, because we have a hard time finding people, you're pretty much a board member as long as you want to be.
Great, thank you, Guthrie. And Ted?
Okay. Well, I said it before. I don't. Maybe you missed mine, Linnell. Just in front of Guthrie.
I'm sorry. I believe my connection is not all that great right now.
No, we're 4 years staggered. 4 years staggered as well on the NNDF.
Okay.
Guthrie already explained the nominals.
Wonderful, wonderful. And so as you can see that several of the boards will vary in board terms, so it just depends on your bylaws and the structure of your organization on the term. Some do stagger terms in order to retain certain board members, so you don't lose all of your board members at the end of 2 years or at the end of 4 years. They'll have staggered terms to keep board members overlapping as we're bringing in new board members. So that's a really good a board management technique, is to stagger your board terms in order to retain the knowledge of the board.
And I would say don't be afraid.
So
you know,
onto effective board management techniques. So one of the best practices is to actually have a board assessment, and this is a good way to evaluate, is your board doing its job? So one way that we can do this, there's actually 3 parts to this, is to look at the self-evaluation piece, and that will be an individual evaluation by the board member themselves. So they'll actually do an assessment to find out, how am I contributing to this organization? Do I still have the time to do this? So what we do is we have some sample evaluation forms that we'll send at the end of the webinar in a separate email link, so that you'll actually have some of these tools that you can use in order to do the evaluation piece. A peer evaluation would include an evaluation from a selection of the board members, so they would actually be able to evaluate one another. A full board evaluation can be done by the board as a whole as well. These evaluations can actually be completed through hard copy evaluation forms, and then you have an individual, maybe the board secretary, collect the information and tally the information, or you can actually use an online software, and that's been very helpful with larger boards or boards that are spread out geographically, so they're able to just log into the system and do an evaluation in that fashion. Strategic planning is also a great way to communicate with your board and keep them involved in the organization. Strategic planning is vitally important to boards, as it accomplishes 3 important tasks. So you'll be able to clearly define the outcomes that the organization would like to achieve over the next 3 to 5 years. I've seen organizations do 10-year strategic plans, so it just depends how far out you would like to go. And then you also want to select broad strategies that will enable the organization to achieve those outcomes. So with strategic planning, you're looking at more broad planning rather than the individual day-to-day planning. And then you also identify ways to measure progress. So strategic planning is a really good tool, and it's an important part of moving an organization forward. And board retreats are also a helpful management technique, because as board members, we generally are volunteers on boards, and so we do have other life things that are going on. Some board members are fully employed, some are enjoying retirement, some have families that can be demanding and taking time as well. So it's good to have a board retreat in order to allow for that time for the board to recharge and then really get excited about what the organization is doing and get involved once again. So board retreats are kind of a way for them to do that. And then communication is really important with board management. So question to the panel: how does your board and executive director communicate with you as a board member? And then what do you feel has been most effective? And I believe we do have Twyla Parker on the line now. Welcome, Twyla.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
I hear
Yes.
you. Yes.
Good. It took me a while to get logged in.
Okay, awesome. So Twyla, how does your board and executive director communicate with the board as a whole? And then what do you feel is most effective in regard to communication?
Right now, we are all sharing emails, and we communicate with each other by cell phone or by text.
Okay, great. And that seems to work very well for you and other board members?
Yes, we're in constant contact with each other almost every day or every other day.
Wonderful. And what about you, Ted?
Well, we use on the Uncommon board. It's a little bit larger board. It's mostly email, newsletter updates. We get our monthly update from our executive director, and then emails also on a monthly basis. And I think I try and touch base with a couple of board members every now and then if there's if we go through a period of time in between meetings, just so that maintain that relationship. That's a national, more of a national organization. Locally, we do once again emails. Of course, as the executive director, I make sure I get an update out to my board at least once a month, and then also I try and get an email out to everybody, just updating them on our clients, how clients are doing, the good, bad, and the ugly. So they know they've kind of got a feel for how the organization is going, what our market's doing, and everybody likes to know when when you've got a good story, when you've got a success story. As you mentioned, you've got a volunteer board. They're given part of their time for this. It's always nice to know that it's you're having a positive effect in people's lives in the community. So that's always helpful. It also helps keep them engaged too. So.
Definitely. Thank you, Ted. I do have a question kind of following up to that. Sharing such an amount of information with the board, has it caused, have you seen any effects other than positive? I'm thinking like possibly the over-involvement of board members in the day-to-day. Have you seen that as a potential effect of possibly over-communicating at times? Or do you feel your board members are strongly appreciative of communication?
On my end, I think they're appreciative. Fortunately, I've been fortunate in that with my board is that I have not had that overly whatever the term was, increased involvement in the day-to-day activities. I've not had that. And then on the board that I sit on, the Uncommon board, the NCN board, really we just talk to each other once a month or so, and that's, other than our board meetings where you sit down and talk about policy, there's no day-to-day. So the two boards that I'm on, basically the answer is no. I have not experienced that. I know what happens in other boards, and I'm glad I don't have to speak to that. So.
Okay, wonderful. And Guthrie, do you want to add anything?
Well, one of the things that is really helping, I've been on a lot of boards over the course of a lot of years, and one of the things that I really see helping is technology. A lot of the entities are using tools like Dropbox now, so you can do online file sharing that everybody can have access to. The local board that we're on, when there are times that we can't get together and meet officially and we still need to get some questions answered, we use a program called Doodle, which is just a real quick poll that you can access over the phone, through email, or on a computer. And it really lets us stay involved even when we're not able to be physically involved or to be mentally involved. We can kind of do it at our leisure. We pose the question to the board, and they can, based on that, determine whether or not they want to support an initiative or whether or not we need to have a face-to-face meeting, those kinds of things. So technology is really helping with that. One of the things I wanted to mention, Ted mentioned that he hasn't seen the over-involvement of boards, and I've seen that quite a bit over the course of the years. And one of the things that all board members need to realize is that they are only officially board members when they're in a meeting. That's when you have the power to make decisions. That's when you have a power to change policy and do those kinds of things. Other than that, you're just a very informed advocate for the organization. It's nice, especially on the local boards. It's hard to do on the national level, but on the local boards, it's really nice to be able to see the program that you're face to face, see what they're doing, see the customers, see the participants, and all that kind of thing. But when you're there as a guest, and you're there as a support mechanism for the organization. The only time you have the authority to be a board member is when you're in that board meeting. And as soon as the board meeting is done, then so is your official involvement.
Great.
You can
Thank
still
you, Guthrie.
participate and do these things. But usually when we would have an
Thank you for sharing that, Guthrie. That is really good information. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say,
okay,
usually
so
when we had an
technology,
overactive,
one of the things that you...
That connection's kind of a tough one. Usually when we would have
I'm sorry, there's a delay. There's a delay.
Yep. When we would have an overactive or over-involved board member, I kind of like to point out to them the fact that the executive director's job is to run the thing. And if you want to have that job, then you should put in for that job. But when you agreed to be a board member, you agreed to a certain set of circumstances that you were going to participate in. And the board is responsible for not only self-evaluating, but kind of self-enforcing the board policies too. When you have that person that is getting a little bit of out of line or getting too involved, it's the board's responsibility to step up and say something to him, not the executive directors.
Great, yes, great information. Thank you for sharing that, Guthrie. The technology piece is definitely an awesome tool that we have that we have available at the touch of our fingertips. So that has been a great way to communicate with board members, especially with rural boards. We tend to be spread over an area of large geographic areas, so having technology available, being able to do webinars, having conference calls, using a Dropbox. A lot of organizations actually use board portals now to download all of the corporate information to where each board member has access, and that makes it easier as well for incoming board members to kind of get up to speed with where the organization is, look at old previous board minutes and find out what has been decided upon, what's been discussed. So technology is definitely huge, and we can use it to our advantage when we're working with boards or serving on a board. And then thank you for sharing having that fine line between micromanaging on boards and actually being an effective board member. So I appreciate your comments to that. So that kind of all ties into communication. So we have different ways to communicate with our board and as board members to communicate with executive staff as we're working towards the same mission and vision of the organization. Next. So another way that we can effectively manage the board is to keep meetings on track. And that's a really simple statement, but sometimes that can be one of the hardest things when we're working with our boards. In some Native communities or in rural communities, we generally have community members. And we may not know as board members exactly what are the roles and responsibilities, which comes into our board orientation, actually really defining what is my responsibility as a board member, what am I supposed to do, and what are the rules and enforcement policies of the organization and as a board. So in order to keep meetings on track, we have generally volunteer board members on a lot of our boards, so we want to respect their time and their commitment to the organization. If we're going to have a 1-hour board meeting, we want to keep it at 1 hour if possible. And then also utilizing board committees. So I want to pose to the panel, do the boards that you currently serve on maximize and use board committees to perform some of the work rather than having it assigned to staff or as a discussion to the board as a whole.
On the local board that I sit on, we have a couple of smaller committees, and having standing committees can sometimes get in your way because they don't really have their own independent mission or purpose. One of the things that I found that has worked in some of the other boards that I've been on is instead of having a standing committee, we would have a task-based committee, so it'd be more like a task force. That would allow you to have a specific goal or objective in mind when you're doing this committee work or this task force work, and something that you can accomplish, that you can build on, that you can help build that foundation of the organization with.
Wonderful. And Ted, do you have anything to add?
On the committees, I'm not. I just echo what Guthrie said. It's important. I think it's important to have committees to on a larger board. You got, otherwise you get unwieldy on our smaller community, or from my local community. We do have periodically a committee for loans, a particular loan or that type of particular project, but for the most part, it's the NNDF board is small enough, and everybody knows each other well enough that the communication they're able to communicate and get things done. If you've got a bigger board, 7, 8, 9, 10 people, all of a sudden, then I think it's important to have committees. Did that make sense? I'm trying to talk and think at the same time. I don't know that it made sense.
That's a good point, Ted. The board, depending on the size of your board, you can generally use board committees to help with the board approval, the board review, the board research aspect of a project. So some boards may only have 4 board members, and it's easy for them to get together and decide and make decisions to move the organization forward, whereas if you have possibly a 20-member board, it may be more effective to use committees to do some of the work. So that's a judgment call between the board and executive staff on how you want to address moving forward on projects. And it may be even not necessarily developing a committee or an ad hoc committee, but developing a task force, as Guthrie said. So those are some good ideas around using committees and or possibly a task force. And that ties into the board size. So generally, the size of the board is dictated by the bylaws, and some organizations, when they're first starting out, they may want to start with a small, intimate number of board members. Some organizations starting out, if they're serving a large geographic area, they may want a larger board. But the size of the board may vary as the organization matures. So generally, you'll go back to your bylaws and then make those organizational decisions. And that can also include a quorum. Some organizations' board of directors will have a specific designated number of board members that need to be in attendance to designate a quorum. However, if the size of your board is changing, your quorum size may as well. So what is effective and what is a good number of board members to be in attendance in order to make management decisions? So those are things that you may want to consider as well. Next. So we'll go ahead and go into our next poll. And this one, I have conducted a board skills and expertise assessment with my board. And it looks like we have the results of the poll. 75% of the participants have not conducted a board skills and expertise assessment of their board. 25% have. So generally, we do like to see board skills and expertise assessments of our board, especially when we're looking at recruiting or expanding our board. If our existing board members have reached their term limit, we're going to have to fill that position. This is a good methodology and process to adopt in order to find the right fit board member for your organization. So I like to think of it as courting or dating in order to bring the right person into the organization, because generally organizations have a certain culture that's tied to them, and they may have a certain need for very specific expertise within the board that would be extremely beneficial. So in order to find that person, it takes a while to review and look through potential candidates. So the next part of the presentation is really looking at effective recruitment. Next. So when we're looking at skills and strengths for the organizations, there's a couple of really good forms that you can adopt, and we'll actually have this in the follow-up email as well. And it provides a really simple way for you to do a board self-assessment and determine the skills needed to achieve strategic goals. Because the purpose of the organization and the board is to continue to move forward to achieve our strategic goals. So we want to make sure that that's always in the forefront. So we list those as our goals. In this table here, we have goals 1 through 5. So for example, we want to open a new facility or a new office. We want to acquire new office space. And then what do we need for that skill set? Maybe commercial construction information, lending experience, commercial lending experience, maybe even legal expertise. So then we can start looking at our board and what do we have within the board currently. Next. And so to look at the skills and strengths of the board, we would do that for each individual board member. So we'll list their skill sets. Maybe we have an attorney on our board, and that might be beneficial to one of our strategic goals that we're looking at. Maybe we have a board member that has mortgage lending experience, and that's going to be beneficial for our loan committee review. So those are really important skills. So it's good to inventory your board on a regular basis so that you always have this information available. Next. And then this last chart is the recruit attributes chart. Because we are an organization, there's certain attributes that we want to look for within our individual board members. And you can modify and adapt this for whatever your organization is looking for. Maybe they need to make the time and have the time available. If they have a very demanding job and are constantly on the road, possibly they're not going to be able to make most of the board meetings. And is that going to impact the selection of this individual on your board? Are they within your footprint, your geographic footprint? Or are they serving an area where your organization provides services to? Do they have access to donors and funders? That might be an important part. If once you complete the assessment and your organization may be a little weak in fundraising, this may be an important attribute that you want to look for within individuals. So this is a good chart that you can actually people that you're courting and actually looking at potentially being on your board of directors. Okay, next. So let's go ahead and go into our next poll. My board recruits new members through public advertisement, the ED recommends new members, the board committee recruits and recommends, general nominations during an annual meeting, and then current board members recommend new members.
Okay, we'll leave the poll open for about 5 more seconds, so cast your votes now.
Okay, great. It looks like we have the results of our poll, and we have, looks like about a third hands, and then right behind that, our current board members recommend new members, general nominations, and public advertisements. So there's different ways to recruit, and organizations all vary depending on the community as well. So we want to look at different ways that we can effectively recruit to maximize who we're going to be bringing into the organization. So let's go to the next slide. So one way that you can recruit for success is to lay the foundation. So you want to ensure that each of the potential board members has a job description available. So if you don't have a job description, that would be one of the first tasks in order, is to develop a job description. What are the expectations of this board member? How much time do I have to commit? What is my role and responsibility for the organization? And then a board commitment agreement is also a good document to have in place with the board members, so that they do understand and they're actually going to commit and agree to commit to the requirements of being a board member. And then one of the things before you even establish your board or bring on new board members is to make sure that you have established policies regarding term limits, conflicts of interest, potential process for removing board members, and then also what is their fundraising role. So these are really important things to have. So let's go back to our panel, and we'll find out, how have you and your board effectively recruited for new members? So Twyla.
Yes.
Have you guys recruited for new board members, and how did that go?
Well, we were shooting for a 5-member board, and since I am a member of the Absentee Shawnee tribe, I got involved with this very early on when we started doing the steering committee. So one of the things we established initially was that we would need a variety of skills to serve on this board so that we could be effective on reaching the target group of people that we needed to reach. So we established we needed someone with a financial background. And at that time, we did have a person who was strong in that area, and he ended up having to give up the position, but he also found someone else to replace him, and that was Gina Gray, and she's an investment advisor, bankers to Native Americans. So he submitted her name. He talked to her first, and so he found someone to replace him when he stepped down. And then we also had recruited a person that has a strong background in marketing. She has also got a strong background in writing grants. So, in fact, it was the past treasurer who was able to recruit her, and her name was Victoria Armstrong, and she has her own company, which is called Tatanka. And the reason we really were fortunate in getting her was she does marketing. So that we concluded would be a vital need to establish a name brand and to effectively communicate and work at ways at getting our name out there and what we were doing to get people to come and apply. So we also have a person from the tribe, Tricia Mann, who's in education, because we noticed well, we didn't notice. We knew that education is a very large component of what this organization would be doing, CDFI. And so her being in education, she has a master's degree in that. So we were fortunate in getting her on the board. And I've had prior board experience for 10 years with an Indian housing authority, and I served 3 tribes, and needless to say, I have a political background, which has, from listening to the input from the other people who spoke, like Guthrie and Ted, I think we're all aware that tribes tend to get possessive sometimes of programs and interfere. So with my political background and my education and my actual work experience out with the government, which I retired from, I serve as chairman. So I try and contact everyone either daily or every other day. And so now we're going to be going and trying to recruit our last board member. So that we initially talked about what kind of skills and what kind of background we needed.
Wonderful. Well, it sounds like you use a variety of methods for recruitment.
You dropped off.
Yeah, we lost.
Linnell, you dropped off.
Sorry about that.
Oh, well, we also do.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we also do advertise in the tribal newsletter, but we also get referrals from different elected officials. But it's up to us whether or not we select them.
Okay, wonderful. Well, it sounds like you do use a variety of methods, and working in Native communities or in rural communities, we can get creative in bringing potential candidates to our board. So let's go to the next slide. Who plays a role in recruitment? So generally it's a collaborative effort between the board and the executive director. Some boards do have a governance or nominating committee, and this is where we can have these committees that do some of the legwork for recruitment. So that can be beneficial for some board members, potential board members. So they glean and review the candidates and push the ones forward that are likely to benefit the board. It can be an ad hoc committee or a standing committee. It just depends on what is in your bylaws, your current bylaws. Next. So the executive director, generally they don't necessarily select board members, because that can actually pose a conflict of interest, because one of the roles of a board member is to evaluate the executive director. So generally you do not want the ED to make a selection on a potential board member, but it can actually provide a good insight to what the board needs, and possibly even recommend potential candidates or someone that has a certain skill set. But it's really ultimately the responsibility of the board to bring on new board members. Next. So in order to have effective recruitment, sometimes it's good just to find the right questions to ask to find that right board member. And that's really where your assessment, your skills assessment of the board is going to be very beneficial for you. So what is our ideal board composition is what we want to ask as a board. Do we need financial expertise? Do we need legal expertise? Do we need advocacy experts that can go out and talk about the organization and about programs and services? Do they have the skill sets needed based on the board assessment? So that assessment is going to be extremely helpful while you're looking at potential board candidates. Next.
Linnell.
Yes.
One of the things I wanted to mention was that don't fall into the trap of trying to find that perfect board member with a perfect set of skills, because a lot of times they're not going to be found. I've found that one of the things that is more important in a lot of instances than skills is passion. You can't teach that. You can teach people skills. You can do through board training and everything. You can bring your board members up and build their quality as they go along and as they continue to stay passionate about the organization. One of the things that we need to remember is that this organization is basically a conduit for a transference of goods and services from one place to another. That other place is our customers. And you got to remember what those customers are going through, and the board members need to have some sort of connection of what those people are going through and why they're coming to an organization like ours in the first place. And I understand the importance of having all of the skills and all of the connections and everything, but a lot of times boards are supposed to be decision-making bodies, and in order to make the decisions, they have to be able to show up. If what you want is an influence bringer, then an advisory board might not be a bad thing for you if you're having trouble finding those people with the high-level skills that can't commit to you as much as you would like them to. Then if you give them the opportunity of participating as an advisor instead of as a board member, then you still get a little bit of their influence and a little bit of their skills without having to have them miss meetings and break quorums and things like that. But I think passion is just as important, if not more important, than the skills.
Yeah, I need to agree with
That's a wonderful comment.
It's yeah, not only do I look for that in board members, but in staff as well. I mean, it's skills you can buy off the shelf. As I remember Jack Northrop has said a couple. You can buy skills off the shelf. You know, passion. You know, the innate stuff you can't, and it's really important to have. You know, if you have somebody who's really passionate and really believes in what you're doing, they can figure out a way to get the skills that you need. You know, they'll figure out a way. So.
That is a perfect segue into the next slide. So how do I recruit members in a small community? Because sometimes we don't have the required skill sets. Maybe we don't have the legal expertise in my community, but we do have passionate board members that are willing to put in the work and research that maybe a legal expert would. So that's a very good point, and it's a very real issue in a lot of our communities. One way that we can look at addressing that issue is have a year-round recruitment process, so you're constantly looking for those passionate people that are willing to be a part of the organization and put in the time and commitment to moving the organization forward and really believing in the vision and the mission of the organization. You can have community members or volunteers for committees to become familiar with the organization, so they'll start learning slowly. Maybe they've never served on a board before, but this may be a good way to introduce them to becoming a board member. And then inviting potential members to board meetings just so that they can have that experience and maybe shadow an existing board member, so you can start gleaning and grooming new potential board members for your organization. So wonderful opportunity. Definitely looking for the passion. Let's go on to the next slide. So this one's I believe is our last poll. So I regularly assess the level of the board's engagement to ensure satisfaction and continued involvement with the board. And we do just have a couple more slides, so we want to be cognizant of your time as well, and we'll finish up here in the next 5 minutes. Okay, and it looks like we have the results, and 64% do not gauge the level of satisfaction and continued involvement with the board. So that's a significant amount. So now that we've talked about recruitment, we talked about finding the right fit for board members. So how do we keep them engaged? And This is probably one of the most difficult aspects of board management, is keeping your board engaged, because we generally have volunteer boards and they're juggling other things in their life. So we want to keep that fire burning and keep that passion going for why they even came to the organization. So let me ask our panel, Ted, what actually draws you to boards and keeps you involved in those organizations?
Well, I think you touched on some of the things early on. Might sound silly, but a periodic meeting in a good place, like a retreat, especially if you're dealing with a volunteer, volunteer board, it's I found that we can't, you can't really afford to. Our organization is so small, you can't really, you can't afford to pay them, and that's a debate for another day, I'm sure. But being able to have a board retreat where you get together once a year someplace, and they get to stay at a hotel and have dinner together. We've done that where we've gotten together and had dinner together as a board, and it almost becomes a visioning moment. You spend 2 days together and come out engaged and ready to, take on the world. Your organization now, you're just ready. You're going to take on the world. You're going to change the whole, the face of the planet, And, that gets you through a couple months, and that keeps them engaged. So, that's one of the things that I do. I think that's really important.
That is very important. I do agree with that, Ted. Go to the next slide, please. So some of the other ways that we can look at board engagement is orientating new members through a formal board orientation. Or if you have existing board members and you've never done an orientation, now would be a good time, maybe at a board retreat or before a strategic planning session, so that they all are informed about their roles and responsibilities. They have access to all the corporate documents. These are really important things as you're coming in as a new board member, that what am I supposed to be doing on this board, and what is the history of this board? So hopefully they do have a familiarity with the board, but for some organizations they don't, and orientation is a vital part of getting them up to speed. And then having that effective board communication, we talked about that earlier in the webinar, how information can be shared with our board members and with our executive staff. So that's really important, because when board members are kept in the loop about strategic goals that we're moving towards, it keeps them involved and they continue to work towards achieving that goal. And then keeping the meetings on strategy, so not having, not going off topic on certain meetings, making sure that we're staying on topic with what's important to the organization. Is this really in line with our mission and vision statement, or is this more of a staff issue that we don't necessarily need to discuss? And then having those candid discussions with our board. Some of the frustrations with board members may be that they are not able to express their opinions, or giving them that platform in order to share information. That can be one-on-one with the board president, and that can be in a group setting, that can be in a committee setting as well. So there's different ways to keep your board involved. Next slide. And what can I do to re-energize longstanding board members? So if we have board members that have been with the organization since inception, they have that passion, they're committed to the organization, but maybe they're not as involved, and that can be due to different reasons in their life. Maybe work is more demanding, maybe family time is more demanding. So we may want to look at, review, and reassign committee duties. Maybe they need to serve on a less active committee, but still being involved with the board. Providing education opportunities for board members. One thing is that once we bring board members onto a board, we don't nurture and push them along and have that development process involved there. So just like our staff, when we're working in a job, we like to have the opportunities to gain new knowledge. What's new with board development? what are some new opportunities that we can look at in re-energizing our board, and that can be through a board retreat, as simple as a board retreat and just going off-site and enjoying some networking time. And then recognition. This is a very simple thing that we can do with our boards, is to recognize their work and just giving that pat on the back and letting them know that we do appreciate all that they do. And this can be through a luncheon or a dinner on a regular basis, just to acknowledge the work that they're doing. And then share success stories, because that can be re-energizing for the board as well, is hearing all the great things that we've done over the past year. They've had a significant impact in it. Next. So any burning questions? We have our panel available. You can type it in chat, or you can raise your hand in chat, and we'll take a couple of questions before we close out the webinar.
Something else that I think is really cool that we did, and I didn't mention it before, is we're starting to do a gala now, an annual gala, and we get a couple of hundred people that show up to this thing, clients and community members and bankers, funders, potential funders, and political leaders, and we try and take that moment to bring our board up in front and let everybody know who our board members are, because they all come from different circles. Each board member has their own little circle of influence, and you don't always get a chance for those circles to intersect. And so when we pull this gala together, it's like a mixture of everybody's circle, and you get to see who is moving in my fellow board member circle. You know what I mean? And you get to talk to them and find out what they do, and the event it's just a pleasant event. It's always heartwarming, and everybody it's a good time for other members of the community to approach the board and say, boy, this is really good. You guys are doing really good. And that, who doesn't like to hear that? That's really why we do what we do, right? And so I think that's really helpful to the board.
Can I say something?
Oh, go ahead.
This is Twyla. I would just want to say we're just an emerging CDFI. So right now we have one staff member, and we have 4 members on our board. So one of the members on the board who does the marketing, she volunteered. She wanted to do the recording of the minutes. So she started doing that, even though she runs a marketing company. So one of the things I did as board chairman to try and recognize her, because one of the things I always stress in the meetings, I cannot make this program work without all of their input from the board members. They are all valuable to us to attaining our goals. And so that's one of the things I try and re-stress. But since one of our board members stepped out and volunteered to do that, even though she runs a business, I did go to Bed and Bath, and I had a coupon, but I bought her some things that were just for her. And so then I gave them to her at the meeting. So she was just really appreciative for that, for being recognized, that she offered to do that little extra bit of keeping track of the minutes, because our one staff member is pretty much loaded down on everything that she's working on, and she's also just finished a progress report, our first progress report. So we have really been working with a shoestring on our finances. So I've really worked really hard at trying to keep them all involved when we have our meetings, and asking for input from everyone, and recognizing the things that they said, and recognizing the ones that we see as valuable, because I cannot see all the angles without having input from everybody on the board. So that's one of the other things I always try and stress to my people on the board, that we need to have participation of everybody to reach our goals and our objectives.
And I think another thing that is really important when we're doing all of this work is, even though this is very serious work for very serious reasons, we need to not take ourselves so seriously sometimes. Most of the boards that I'm involved in, I'm a bit of a smart aleck sometimes, so it should be fun. You should be wanting to do this. It should be something that you look forward to doing every month. And if you go in there and it's just
well, thank you, Twyla, for your comments
process,
there, and Ted as well.
It's not going to do much for you.
I really appreciate that. So we're going to go ahead and wrap up here. Next.
Guthrie, when you talking?
I was, but I think that the delay is getting in the way, so.
Go ahead, Guthrie, because I think it's important that you have fun, because we do that too, because right now it's a board of women. So needless to say, there are times that we will kind of joke around, and then we will take a short break if somebody has driven up quite a ways and we're still halfway through our agenda. We encourage them to, speak up, and sometimes we've had taken a little break where everybody gone back to get more coffee, and we come back and we kind of joke and laugh about stuff. But you're right, you should be able to have levity during the time that you're having a meeting. That way we all look forward to seeing each other the next time we come to a meeting.
Yeah, and even though it's serious work, it should be fun. You should want to be involved.
Right. I agree.
Definitely, definitely. Well, I do appreciate your comments. Those were extremely helpful comments in relation to what we were talking about. We're going to go ahead and wrap up the webinar. So I hope that we were able to give the participants some ideas and some new tools in managing your board if you're currently serving on a board or if you're working with your board. And I hope that we were able to provide techniques and some ideas around managing and addressing skills and strengths, and then even recruitment and keeping those individuals involved with the organization. So we have our very last poll before we completely conclude, and this is just to kind of get an idea of what other webinars would be beneficial to you. So if we can launch that last poll. So future webinar topics that are of interest to you: social media management, program development, loan portfolio management, program evaluation and assessment, or any others that maybe we didn't list. You can type them in the chat box. So we'll give you a few seconds to get that done.
Okay, just a few more seconds, so cast your votes now.
Okay, awesome. And we will definitely take this into consideration in development of our future webinars. We generally have a webinar once a month. Next month, we're actually in partnership with the Native Learning Center, and we will be doing a CDFI series. So that will be sent as well in the follow-up email. So if you're interested in that, it will be a 3-part series in June via webinar, and then you can subscribe, or you can register through the Native Learning Center website. So follow us on Facebook, Twitter. We're on Twitter. You can also subscribe to the OESTA newsletter. So if you go to our homepage, it's up in the sign-up is in the right-hand corner. So I'd like to thank all of you for attending and participating in our webinar for board management. Like I stated before, we'll send you a link of the recording of the webinar along with a link for the evaluations and handouts. So, and there's our contact information. Feel free to contact me with any questions, or even Stephanie Cote. And I'd like to definitely thank our panelists. We appreciate your time and all the information that you shared with us. So you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.